They poured the milkshake on her head. Slow, laughing, phones out. And the waitress didn't move because she knew reacting would make it worse. What she didn't know was that the man walking in next wasn't security, wasn't management. It was the brother she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, and he was about to make everyone in that room regret breathing. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. The Velvet Lounge was upscale in that deliberately understated way. Exposed brick walls, vintage leather booths, bottles of liquor that cost more than most people's monthly rent glowing like amber jewels behind the mahogany bar. It was the kind of place where Manhattan's aspiring elite came to feel important, to throw money around like confetti, to treat service workers like props in their personal theater. Gabriella had been working there for 6 hours straight. Her feet ached in the required black heels. Her smile had worn thin somewhere around hour 4, but she'd kept it plastered on because she needed this job, needed the $200 this shift would bring, needed to stay invisible, stay far away from the life she'd abandoned 5 years ago. Table 7 had been trouble from the moment they'd walked in. 4 men in their 30s, suits expensive but worn with the carelessness of people who could replace them without thought. Their voices had grown progressively louder with each round of drinks, their laughter more aggressive, their eyes more predatory. The man in the brown suit, slicked back hair styled with too much product, smile like a shark scenting blood had been the worst. He'd snapped his fingers at her twice, called her sweetheart in that tone that made it sound like an insult. His friends had laughed at everything he said, encouraging him, feeding the monster. When she'd approached with their 4th round of cocktails, she'd felt the shift in energy, the way they'd exchanged glances, the way Brown Suit had grabbed someone's abandoned milkshake from the next table, thick and pink and ridiculous. "You know what?" he'd said, his words slurred but his intention crystal clear. "I think she needs to cool off." One of his friends, blonde, phone already out, had grinned. "Do it, Harrison, do it." Gabriella had seen it coming half a second too late. The glass tilted, the cream poured. Cold liquid hit her scalp with shocking intensity, cascading down her face like a baptism of humiliation. Strawberry and vanilla, mixed with the bitter taste of powerlessness. The table exploded with laughter. Brown Suit Harrison held his phone up, recording her reaction, his smile widening as he captured her standing motionless, dripping, destroyed. "Oh my God, that's amazing," someone said. "Send that to me. This is going on Instagram." The lounge seemed to hold its breath. Conversations at other tables died. The bartender looked over but didn't move. A woman in a red dress covered her mouth but didn't intervene. Everyone was watching now, but no one was helping. Gabriella's hands trembled at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to cry, to do something. But she'd learned a long time ago that showing weakness only fed people like this. So she stood there, cream dripping from her chin, her uniform ruined, her dignity shredded for the entertainment of strangers. Harrison laughed harder, standing up now, playing to his audience. "That's what you get for being so clumsy earlier." She hadn't been clumsy. She'd done nothing wrong, but the lie would stick because he had power and she didn't. The room buzzed with whispers. Someone giggled. Phones stayed raised, recording, sharing, making her humiliation permanent. Then the doors opened. The heavy oak doors at the entrance swung inward, and the quality of silence changed. It wasn't just quiet anymore, it was the kind of stillness that comes before lightning strikes. A man walked in, black suit, no tie, the top button of his white shirt undone. Dark hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't so carefully controlled. But it was his hands that drew the eye tattooed. Intricate patterns visible even in the low light. Hands that had clearly done things that left permanent marks. He moved with the economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion was dangerous. His eyes swept the room with the calm assessment of a predator cataloging prey. Gabriella's vision was blurred with cream, her breath coming in short gasps she fought to control. But she felt the shift, felt the way the room's attention pivoted from her humiliation to this new presence. When she finally managed to blink enough cream away to see clearly, her heart stopped. Juan, her brother, her protector, her past, the man she'd sworn never to see again. Juan Manuel Guzman stood in the doorway, his dark eyes locked on her with an intensity that made the air feel thin. For a moment, one suspended. Impossible moment, they just stared at each other across 5 years of silence and grief and guilt. His gaze traveled from her face to the cream in her hair to the phone still recording to the men at table 7, who were just now beginning to understand that something had shifted. Harrison, emboldened by alcohol and audience, laughed. "Hey man, sorry, we're having a private moment here." Juan didn't acknowledge him, didn't even glance in his direction. He moved forward through the frozen room, his footsteps silent on the marble floor, his focus entirely on Gabriella. When he reached her, he stopped. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar, and smoke, familiar and foreign all at once. Without a word, he shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was warm from his body, heavy with protection she'd refused for half a decade. His hands were gentle as he adjusted the jacket, careful not to touch her skin, giving her space even as he stood between her and the watching room. "You don't have to say anything," he said softly, his voice rough with something that might have been regret. Gabriella's lips trembled. Words died in her throat. But she managed 3 that changed everything. "I didn't deserve that." Juan's jaw tightened. His eyes, dark and dangerous and completely, utterly calm, met hers. "I know." Then he turned to face table 7, and Harrison's smile finally began to fade. Juan Manuel Guzman had been 7 years old when he first understood what it meant to protect someone. Their mother, Elena Guzman, had been walking him and Gabriella home from school through their Brooklyn neighborhood when 3 men approached. Juan remembered the way his mother had gone still, the way she'd pushed both children behind her legs, the way her voice had stayed calm, even though her hands were shaking. "Stay behind me," she'd whispered. "Don't move." The men had wanted her purse. She'd given it without argument. But when one of them had tried to look at Gabriella, his baby sister, only 4 years old, clutching her stuffed rabbit, his mother had stepped forward. "You got what you wanted," Elena had said, her voice steel wrapped in silk. "Now leave." They'd left. And Juan had learned that protection sometimes meant standing between danger and the people you loved, even when you were terrified, even when you had nothing but your body to offer as a shield. For years, that's all he'd been able to offer. His body, his loyalty, his willingness to bleed. It hadn't been enough. The memory shifted, jumping forward like a scratched record finding a new groove. Juan was 17 now, standing in a hospital corridor that smelled like disinfectant and death. Gabriella sat beside him, 15 years old, her face streaked with tears she was too exhausted to wipe away. Their mother was dying, not from illness, not from age, from violence that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with the world Juan had been building in the shadows. He'd thought he was being careful, thought he could keep his family separate from his work, from the men he answered to, from the debts and deals and dangerous promises that were making him powerful in ways his teenage self had craved. But power doesn't stay contained. It bleeds. It spreads. It infects everything it touches. Elena Guzman had been walking home from her nursing shift at 3 a.m. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong enemy who'd wanted to send Juan's boss a message and didn't care who delivered it. The bullets weren't even meant for her. She'd just been there. Collateral damage in a war she didn't know existed. Juan had held her hand while she died, had whispered promises he couldn't keep, had felt her final breath against his palm like a curse. "Take care of your sister," Elena had managed to say, her voice barely audible over the machines that were failing to save her. "Promise me, Juan. Promise me you'll keep her safe." "I promise, Mama. I promise." He'd meant it. God. He'd meant it with every fiber of his teenage heart. But Gabriella had looked at him across their mother's hospital bed, and her eyes had held something worse than grief. They'd held accusation. "This is because of you," she'd said, her voice flat and dead. "Because of what you do. Because of who you work for." "Gabby, don't." She'd stood up, shaking. "Don't apologize. Don't make promises. Don't tell me you'll fix this. You can't fix this. She's dead because of your choices." The words had landed like bullets. Accurate. Devastating. True. Juan had tried everything after that, had paid for the funeral, the most expensive one he could arrange, as if money could purchase absolution, had set up a trust fund for Gabriella's education, had sent messages through mutual friends, left voicemails that went unanswered, written letters that came back unopened. For 5 years, he'd been trying to apologize. For 5 years, Gabriella had refused to hear it. And maybe she'd been right to refuse. Because what could he say? That he was sorry? Sorry didn't resurrect the dead. Sorry didn't undo the choices that had put his mother in harm's way. Sorry was just a word people used when they wanted forgiveness they hadn't earned. So Juan had stopped trying to apologize and started trying to become someone worth forgiving. He'd climbed higher in the organization, had become indispensable, had learned that power, properly wielded, could protect people, could keep them safe in ways his teenage self had never understood. He'd built an empire on the principle that family was untouchable, that the people under his protection stayed protected, that debts were always paid, both the ones he owed and the ones owed to him. But none of it had brought Gabriella back. Until tonight. Juan had come to the Velvet Lounge without bodyguards, without backup, without the armor of his reputation. He'd rehearsed what he would say during the entire drive from his penthouse, had planned every word, every gesture, every possible response to her inevitable rejection. He'd expected her to tell him to leave, expected her to refuse his apology again, expected, maybe, that she'd finally tell him she hated him, which would at least be honest. He hadn't expected to walk in and find her standing in the middle of the room with a milkshake dripping down her face while strangers laughed and recorded her humiliation like it was entertainment. The sight had hit him with physical force. His baby sister, the girl he'd taught to ride a bike, who'd fallen asleep on his shoulder during movie nights, who'd looked at him like he could fix anything reduced to a spectacle for cruel men's amusement. Something had broken inside him in that moment. Or maybe something had finally, terribly aligned. Now, standing with his jacket around her shoulders, Juan felt the familiar weight of purpose settle into his bones. The same purpose that had driven him at 7, at 17, at every age when someone he loved had been threatened. Protection, justice, consequences. Behind him, he heard Harrison clear his throat nervously, heard the scrape of a chair as one of the other men shifted, heard the click of a phone camera still recording. Juan turned slowly. His eyes found Harrison, first the man in the brown suit who was still smiling, but the smile was starting to crack at the edges. "That was just a joke, man," Harrison said, his voice pitched too loud, trying to sound confident. "No harm done, right? We were just having fun." Juan said nothing. He simply looked at Harrison, looked at each of the men at table 7, memorized their faces with the same careful attention he gave to contracts and debts and promises. The silence stretched, became uncomfortable, became frightening. Finally, Juan spoke, his voice quiet enough that only the men at the table could hear. "What's your name?" Harrison's smile faltered completely. "What?" "Your name." Harrison Yates." Juan nodded once, as if confirming something. Then he turned back to Gabriella. "Can I walk you home?" he asked softly. Gabriella's eyes were still wide with shock, with confusion, with the weight of 5 years crashing into this single moment. But she nodded. Juan guided her toward the exit, his hand hovering near her back but not touching, giving her space even as he claimed his right to protect her. As they reached the door, Gabriella finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Why were you here, Juan?" He paused, his hand on the door. When he answered, his voice carried the weight of 5 years of unanswered apologies. "I came to say I'm sorry. I came to beg you to forgive me." He glanced back at the table where 4 men sat frozen. "I came too late." The night air hit Gabriella like a slap. After the warm, suffocating atmosphere of the Velvet Lounge, the cold February wind felt almost violent. She pulled Juan's jacket tighter around her shoulders, the expensive fabric still warm from his body, smelling like cedar and memories she'd tried to bury. Her uniform was ruined. Cream had dried in sticky patches across her chest, her collar stiff and uncomfortable against her skin. Her hair hung in clumps, parts of it still wet, other parts hardening into grotesque sculptures. She could feel it cracking when she moved her head. Juan walked beside her, silent, his presence both familiar and alien. He'd always been tall, but now he seemed to take up more space, not physically larger, but dense with authority, with the weight of someone who'd become exactly what their mother had feared he would become. They walked 3 blocks before Gabriella found her voice. "How did you know where I worked?" Juan's jaw tightened. "I didn't. I was looking for you. I'd tried your old apartment, called people we used to know. Someone mentioned you might be in this neighborhood. The Velvet Lounge was the 5th place I checked tonight." 5th place. He'd been searching for her all evening. "Why?" The word came out harsher than she intended. "Why tonight? It's been 5 years, Juan. 5 years of nothing, and suddenly you're just here?" "Because I'm tired," he said simply. His voice was rough, honest in a way that made her chest ache. "Tired of waking up every morning knowing I destroyed us. Tired of seeing your face in crowds and realizing it's never actually you. Tired of being feared by everyone except the one person whose opinion ever mattered." Gabriella's breath caught. She wanted to stay angry. Anger was safer than the other emotions churning inside her. But his words landed with the weight of truth, and truth was harder to dismiss. They turned onto her street. Small apartment buildings lined both sides, fire escapes creating geometric shadows in the streetlight. A bodega on the corner was still open, its fluorescent lights harsh and practical. "This is me," Gabriella said, stopping in front of a building with peeling green paint and a broken intercom. "Third floor, A." Juan looked at the building, then at her. "Can I?" "No." The word came out automatically, defensive. Then softer. "Not inside." "I can't. Not yet." He nodded, understanding without argument. They stood on the sidewalk, the city humming around them, distant sirens, a car alarm 3 blocks over, someone's music drifting from an open window. Gabriella reached up to touch her hair and winced. The cream had dried into a helmet, pulling at her scalp. She must look ridiculous, pathetic. Everything those men had wanted her to be. "I didn't deserve that." The words escaped before she could stop them, the same words she'd said in the lounge. But now they carried more weight, more history. Juan's eyes found hers, and in the streetlight she could see something dangerous flickering behind his carefully controlled expression. "I know," he said again. But this time he continued, "And they're going to learn that, soon." "Juan, I'm not asking your permission, Gabby." His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath. "I'm just telling you what's going to happen." Fear prickled along her spine. Not fear of him. Juan had never once made her afraid for herself. Fear for him. Fear of what he might do. Fear that the brother she'd loved was so far gone into his world that he couldn't see the difference between protection and destruction anymore. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Juan was silent for a long moment. Then, "Nothing you need to worry about. Nothing violent. I'm not that person anymore." "Aren't you?" The question hung between them like a ghost. "Mama died because of violence, Juan. Because of your world. And now you want to drag that world back into my life because some drunk asshole poured a milkshake on me? That's not." Juan stopped himself, took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. "This isn't about dragging you into my world. This is about making sure my world understands you're protected." "There's a difference." "Is there?" Gabriella's voice cracked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks the same. It looks like you using your power to solve problems with fear and consequences and whatever else you do now. And maybe those men deserve it. Maybe they're terrible people who've done terrible things. But Mama didn't deserve what happened to her. And you using violence to protect me won't bring her back." The words hit Juan like physical blows. She watched him absorb each one, his face remaining carefully neutral but his hands curling into fists at his sides. "You're right," he said finally. "Nothing I do will bring her back. Nothing I do will undo that night, or change the fact that my choices killed her. I know that, Gabi. I've known that every single day for 5 years." Tears burned in Gabriella's eyes. She'd cried in the lounge, silent tears mixed with cream, invisible in her humiliation. But these tears were different. These were the tears she'd been holding back for 5 years, the grief and anger and love she'd tried to bury under silence and distance. "Then why?" Her voice broke completely now. "Why show up? Why protect me now when you couldn't protect her?" Juan's control finally cracked. His eyes shone with moisture he refused to let fall. "Because I failed once, and I won't fail again. Because you're all I have left of her. Because maybe I can't fix what I destroyed, but I can make damn sure nobody else destroys you." The rawness in his voice undid something in Gabriella's chest. For a moment, they weren't a mafia boss and the sister who'd abandoned him. They were just 2 people who'd lost their mother and didn't know how to exist in the hole she'd left behind. "I don't forgive you," Gabriella whispered. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know. But," she pulled his jacket tighter, the weight of it feeling less like a burden and more like shelter. "Thank you. For tonight. For coming when you did." Juan's expression softened slightly. "Can I call you? Tomorrow?" Gabriella hesitated. 5 years of silence screamed at her to say no, to maintain the distance that had kept her safe from his world. But something had shifted tonight, not healed, not resolved, but cracked open just enough to let light through. "Maybe," she said. "Just maybe." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the first word that wasn't no in 5 years. Juan nodded, accepting it for the gift it was. He turned to leave, then paused. "Those men tonight," he said without looking back. "I meant what I said. They're going to learn. But I promise you no violence, no blood, just consequences." Before Gabriella could respond, he was walking away, disappearing into the night like smoke. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, his jacket around her shoulders, wondering if there really was a difference between protection and destruction, and wondering why, despite everything, she hoped he was right. Juan didn't go home. He walked through Manhattan for hours, his white shirt growing cold without his jacket, the city's late-night rhythm pulsing around him like a heartbeat, past closed storefronts with metal grates pulled down like sleeping eyelids, past couples stumbling out of bars, their laughter too loud and too sharp, past homeless men huddled in doorways, their eyes tracking him with the wariness of people who recognized predators. He'd rehearsed his apology for weeks, had written it down, crossed it out, rewritten it, had practiced in mirrors like some lovesick teenager preparing for a first date, had imagined every possible response Gabriella might give, prepared counter-arguments for each rejection, built bridges he'd hoped would span 5 years of silence. "I'm sorry" felt too small for what he'd done. "I love you" felt too presumptuous after abandoning her to grief. "I've changed" was a lie he couldn't quite commit to. So he'd settled on the truth, that he was tired of being estranged from the only family he had left, that he understood if she never forgave him, but that he needed her to know he'd never stop trying to be worthy of forgiveness. The speech had died in his throat the moment he'd seen the milkshake dripping down her face. All those carefully constructed words had evaporated, replaced by something more primitive, more fundamental. The same instinct that had driven him at 7 years old when his mother had pushed him and Gabriella behind her legs: protect, defend, destroy anything that threatens them. Juan found himself on the Brooklyn Bridge as dawn began threatening the eastern horizon. The city sprawled below him, a constellation of artificial stars, 8 million people sleeping or working or suffering in their own private wars. He pulled out his phone, stared at Gabriella's contact information, the number he'd kept even though she'd changed it 3 times, always managing to find the new one through the networks he'd built. He'd never called, never crossed that line, just kept the number like a talisman, proof she still existed somewhere in the world. Now he scrolled past her name to a different contact. "It's early, boss," Rodrigo answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Good soldiers never really slept. "I need information on 4 men," Juan said. "They were at the Velvet Lounge tonight, late 20s to mid-30s. I have a name for one of them, Harrison Yates." A pause. Then, "What kind of information?" "Everything. Where they work, who they know, what they owe, what they're hiding." "Time frame?" "By noon." Another pause, longer this time. Rodrigo knew better than to ask why. "Consider it done." Juan hung up, stood watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded him of his mother's kitchen on Sunday mornings. Elena making pancakes, Gabriella doing homework at the table, Juan pretending to read the sports section while actually watching his family exist in their small pocket of peace. Before he'd destroyed it all, his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Gabriella. I changed my number again, but I thought you should have it. Don't make me regret this." Juan stared at the message for a full minute, then typed back, "You won't." 3 letters, a promise he intended to keep. By 8 a.m., Juan was in his penthouse office, overlooking Central Park. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, a Picasso sketch he'd purchased at auction because his mother had once said Picasso understood that beauty and pain were the same thing. Rodrigo arrived at 9 with a manila folder thick enough to contain lives. "That was fast," Juan said. Rodrigo shrugged. "You'd be surprised what people document about themselves. Social media makes my job almost too easy." He dropped the folder on Juan's desk. "You want the summary or the deep dive?" "Summary first. Harrison Yates, 32, works at his father's investment firm Yates Capital Management. Spoiled, entitled, multiple complaints filed against him for workplace harassment that daddy's lawyers made disappear. His 3 friends from last night are similar profiles. Old money protecting new assholes." Rodrigo paused. "But here's where it gets interesting." Juan leaned forward. "Yates Capital manages several union pension funds, specifically construction unions. They're not doing it legally, skimming points, falsifying reports, the usual creative accounting that only works when nobody's watching." Rodrigo smiled coldly. "People are about to start watching." Juan flipped open the folder. Bank statements, email exchanges, photographs of meetings that should have been private. The machinery of corruption laid bare on glossy paper. "The other 3?" he asked. "One owns a nightclub that's been cited 12 times for code violations, but somehow keeps passing inspections. One runs a luxury car import business that's definitely not checking VIN numbers as carefully as they should. One's a lawyer who specializes in making DUIs disappear for wealthy clients, has a whole network of bribed court clerks. Juan absorbed this information, like a general studying a battlefield. Each man had built his life on systems that required looking the other way, required people in power choosing not to notice, required protection from consequences. "I'm not creating their problems," Juan said quietly. "I'm just removing the umbrella, keeping them dry." "Boss?" Rodrigo's voice carried a note of concern. "This is about the waitress from last night, isn't it?" Juan's eyes snapped up. "She has a name, Gabriela, and she's my sister." Understanding dawned across Rodrigo's face. "The sister. The one you've been—" He stopped himself. "I didn't know she was working there." "Neither did I." Juan closed the folder. "Which is why those men thought they could humiliate her without consequence. They saw a waitress, someone powerless, someone whose dignity was negotiable entertainment. They didn't know she was a Guzman." "No," Juan's voice went cold. "But they're going to learn. Not through violence, not through fear, through the simple revelation that actions have consequences, and protection has to be earned." Rodrigo nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Make copies of everything in this folder. Send one set to the Department of Labor anonymous tip about pension fund mismanagement. Send another to the State Liquor Authority about the nightclub. The car business gets reported to Customs. The lawyer gets his files forwarded to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee. Just like that, we burn them all?" "We don't burn anything," Juan corrected. "We just stop putting out their fires. Let nature take its course." Rodrigo left with the folder, and Juan was alone again with the sunrise and his phone and the weight of choices he couldn't unmake. His phone buzzed. "Gabriela, did you sleep?" Juan smiled despite everything. She was checking on him. After 5 years of silence, after everything, she was checking on him. "Not yet," he typed back. "But I will. You?" "A little. Had nightmares. The usual." Juan's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Finally, I know you are. That's the problem. I know you mean it, and it still doesn't fix anything." "I know," Juan wrote. "But maybe we can start with something smaller than fixing everything." "Like what?" "Like coffee. Tomorrow. Just coffee." A long pause. Then, "Maybe." That word again. The first crack in 5 years of walls. Juan set down his phone and looked out at the city waking up below him, millions of people starting their days, unaware that 4 men's carefully constructed lives were about to collapse. He'd promised Gabriela no violence. He'd keep that promise. But consequences? Consequences were just justice wearing a patient smile. Gabriela couldn't focus. She'd called in sick to her morning shift at the diner, her second job, the one that started at 6 a.m. and involved bottomless coffee refills and truckers who tipped in quarters. Her manager hadn't been pleased, but Gabriela's voice had been raw enough, her excuse about food poisoning convincing enough, that he'd relented. Now she sat in her tiny apartment, wrapped in a blanket despite the radiator clanging its metallic symphony, staring at her phone like it might explode. Juan had texted 3 times. Nothing invasive, nothing demanding, just, "Good morning," followed an hour later by, "Made sure your manager at the Velvet Lounge knows you're taking a few days off." Paid. And then finally, "I meant what I said about coffee. No pressure. Just think about it." The fact that he could make her absence paid with a single phone call should have terrified her. Instead, it just made her tired. This was Juan's world, a place where money and influence could reshape reality, where problems dissolved with the right word to the right person, where power was currency, and currency was everything. Their mother would have hated it. Elena Guzman had been a nurse for 23 years, working double shifts to keep them fed and housed and safe. She'd believed in honest work, in earning what you had, in the dignity of labor that left your hands tired and your conscience clean. Juan had built an empire on the opposite principles. And yet, Gabriela couldn't deny the relief of not having to face the Velvet Lounge today, not having to walk past table 7 and remember the laughter, the phones, the feeling of cream sliding down her face while strangers turned her humiliation into entertainment. Her phone buzzed. Not Juan this time, an unknown number. "Hi, Gabriela. This is Detective Lisa Torres with NYPD. I'd like to speak with you about an incident at the Velvet Lounge last night. Could you call me back?" Gabriela's blood went cold. She stared at the message, her mind racing through possibilities. Had someone filed charges? Was she in trouble? Had Juan? No. He'd promised no violence. But consequences, he'd said. Just consequences. She called the number with shaking hands. "Detective Torres," a woman's voice answered. Professional but not unkind. This is Gabriela Guzman. You sent me a message? Yes, thank you for calling back so quickly. I want to assure you first that you're not in any trouble. I'm actually calling because we received several anonymous tips this morning about workplace harassment at the Velvet Lounge, and your name came up as a potential witness. Witness to what? That's what I'm trying to determine. Were you working there last night? Gabriela's throat tightened. Yes. And did anything unusual happen during your shift? The milkshake, the laughter, the phones, Juan appearing like a ghost from her past, wrapping his jacket around her shoulders, his eyes promising things she was afraid to understand. There was an incident with some customers. They were drunk. They poured a drink on me. It was humiliating, but I didn't think it was criminal. Assault can take many forms, Miss Guzman. And according to the tips we received, this wasn't the first time these particular individuals have engaged in this kind of behavior. A pause. Did anyone film the incident? Several people. Would you be willing to come in and give a formal statement? Again, you're not in trouble. But if there's a pattern of behavior here, we'd like to document it. Gabriela closed her eyes. This was Juan. Had to be. Somehow he'd set this in motion, not violence, like he'd promised, but exposure. Consequences. The machinery of official justice grinding into motion because he'd pushed the right buttons. I need to think about it, Gabriela said. Of course. Take your time. But Miss Guzman, whatever happened last night, you didn't deserve it, and the people responsible should face consequences. That's all we're trying to ensure. After they hung up, Gabriela sat in silence for a long time. Then she texted Juan. What did you do? His response came immediately. Made some phone calls, asked some questions, sent some information to some people who should have been paying attention already. You promised no violence. I kept that promise. This is just the truth coming to light. That's not violence. That's accountability. Gabriela wanted to be angry, wanted to rage at him for interfering, for dragging her into his world of manipulation and calculated justice. But underneath the anger was something more complicated, a small, shameful part of her that felt vindicated, that wanted Harrison Yates and his friends to face consequences for treating her like she was nothing. A detective called me. She typed. I know. Detective Torres. She's good at her job. Fair. She won't pressure you. Whatever you decide to tell her or not tell her is your choice. I just made sure she knew there was something worth investigating. How many other people did you call? Enough. The vagueness of his answer should have been infuriating. Instead, it just felt inevitable. This was who Juan had become, someone who could make phone calls that reshaped reality, who could pull strings invisible to everyone else, who wielded power like a surgeon wielded a scalpel. Precise. Controlled. Devastating. Across the city, in a glass-walled office overlooking Madison Avenue, Harrison Yates was learning what it felt like when protection evaporated. His father had called him at 7 a.m., voice tight with the kind of anger that came from discovering your son had created problems that money couldn't easily solve. The Department of Labor is auditing every pension fund we manage, Richard Yates had said. Every single one. They have documentation that should not exist, email exchanges that should have been deleted, bank records that should have been untraceable. Harrison's hangover had evaporated instantly. Dad, I don't know. I don't care what you know or don't know. What I care about is that you've brought scrutiny onto this firm that we cannot afford. Scrutiny that arrived the morning after you got drunk and decided to humiliate a waitress for your amusement. That was just a joke. I don't care if she was the Queen of England. You made a spectacle of yourself, and now we're being investigated. The lawyers are telling me it's going to take months to untangle this, assuming we can untangle it at all. Harrison had tried calling his friends, tried to compare notes, to figure out what was happening. But they were all dealing with their own catastrophes. Michael's nightclub had been raided at dawn, not for anything violent, just a sudden, aggressive inspection that found every code violation he'd been paying inspectors to ignore for 3 years. Closure notice posted on the door by 9 a.m. Trevor's luxury car business had customs agents going through every import record from the past 18 months, comparing VIN numbers to documentation, finding discrepancies that suggested a very expensive legal problem. And James, the lawyer who'd built a career making inconvenient charges disappear, had received notification that the Bar Association was opening an ethics investigation based on credible allegations of witness tampering and bribery of court officials. 4 men, 4 different problems, all arriving the same morning. All exactly 12 hours after they'd poured a milkshake over a waitress's head. Harrison stared at his phone. At the video he'd posted to Instagram last night, Gabriela standing frozen, cream dripping down her face, His own laughter audible in the audio. 73 likes. Dozens of comments calling it hilarious and savage. He deleted it an hour ago, but the internet never really forgot. And now he was starting to understand that some things were connected in ways he'd been too privileged to notice. That the waitress he'd humiliated had a brother. That the brother had walked into the Velvet Lounge with tattoos and a black suit and eyes that had memorized faces. That consequences existed, even for people like Harrison Yates. Especially for people like Harrison Yates. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. You poured a drink on my sister. You thought there would be no consequences. You were wrong. Harrison's hands shook as he typed back. Who is this? The response came immediately. Someone who remembers. Someone who pays debts. Someone who keeps promises. Then, you don't get forgiveness. The messages stopped, but the investigations didn't. And across the city, Juan Manuel Guzman set down his phone and allowed himself the smallest smile. Not from cruelty, from satisfaction. Justice didn't always come with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it came with manila folders and phone calls and the slow, inevitable collapse of houses built on foundations of sand. 3 days after the Milkshake incident, Gabriella met Juan for coffee. She'd chosen the place, a small cafe in Williamsburg, far from both her apartment and the Velvet Lounge, neutral territory where neither of them had ghosts waiting. She arrived 15 minutes early, ordered a black coffee she didn't drink, and watched the door like it might produce either salvation or catastrophe. Juan appeared exactly on time, still in a suit, though this one was charcoal gray instead of black, still carrying himself with that careful control that made people unconsciously step aside. But when he saw her, something in his face softened just for a moment, just enough to remind her of the brother who'd taught her to tie her shoes. You came, he said, sliding into the chair across from her. I said maybe. Maybe turned into yes. I'll take it. He ordered an espresso from the passing waiter, then turned his full attention to her. How are you? The question was so simple, so normal, that it almost broke her. When was the last time someone had asked how she was and actually waited for a real answer? Confused, Gabriella admitted. Detective Torres called me twice more. She's very persistent. She's good at her job. The manager at the Velvet Lounge called too. Said corporate wants to meet with me about the incident. They sounded scared, Juan. Like they thought I was going to sue them or something. They should be scared. They have a liability problem and they're just now realizing it. Gabriella wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, absorbing its warmth. What exactly did you do? And don't give me vague answers about making phone calls. I need to understand. Juan leaned back, considering. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. Harrison Yates works for his father's investment firm. They manage union pension funds, construction workers. Mostly. Blue-collar people who trust their retirement savings to men in suits who promise to protect them. Okay. Except the Yates family has been skimming those funds for years. Small amounts, hard to detect. But it adds up. Millions of dollars that should be going to workers' retirements are going to offshore accounts instead. Gabriella's stomach turned. And you, what? Reported them? I made sure the right people received information they should have had already. The Department of Labor doesn't need me to tell them how to do their job. They just needed to know where to look. You're saying they were already criminals. You just exposed them. Exactly. Juan's espresso arrived and he took a careful sip. Harrison's friends have similar problems. The nightclub owner has been bribing fire inspectors for years, actual safety violations that put people at risk. The car dealer has been importing stolen vehicles with false documentation. The lawyer has been bribing court clerks to make DUIs disappear. So you destroyed 4 men's lives because they humiliated me? No. Juan's voice sharpened. I removed the protection that was allowing 4 criminals to continue hurting people. There's a difference, Gabi. These men didn't suddenly become criminals because they poured a drink on you. They've always been criminals. They just thought they were untouchable. Gabriella wanted to argue, wanted to find the flaw in his logic, but the truth was complicated and uncomfortable. You're still using your power to punish them. That's still your world, Juan. That's still the thing that killed Mama. Juan flinched. The direct hit landed exactly as she'd intended. You're right, he said quietly. I am using power, but I'm trying to use it differently than I used to. Not for profit, not for territory, for accountability. Is that still wrong? I don't know, Gabriella's voice cracked. I don't know anymore. Part of me wants them to suffer for what they did, for making me feel small and powerless, and like my dignity was negotiable. But another part of me is terrified that this is just the beginning, That your world is swallowing mine again. It's not. I promise you. This ends with them facing consequences for things they actually did. I'm not framing anyone. I'm not creating evidence. I'm just making sure the evidence that already exists gets seen by people who can do something about it. Before Gabriella could respond, her phone buzzed. A news alert. Yates Capital Management under federal investigation for pension fund fraud. She showed Juan the screen. He read it without expression. That was fast, Gabriella said. The Department of Labor moves quickly when they have solid evidence. And they have very solid evidence. Because you gave it to them. Because Harrison Yates documented his own crimes in emails and text messages. I just pointed the investigators toward the documentation. Gabriella set down her phone. Around them, the cafe hummed with normal life students on laptops, couples sharing pastries, a woman reading a novel in the corner, people living in a world where milkshakes were just desserts and consequences were abstract concepts. What happens to them now? She asked. Legally, investigations, audits, probably indictments. Harrison's father will hire expensive lawyers, try to shift blame, maybe succeed partially. The others will face their own reckonings. Michael's nightclub is closed pending a full safety review, which it won't pass. Trevor's car business is being investigated by Customs and the FBI. James is looking at disbarment and possible criminal charges. And you're okay with that? With destroying their lives? Juan's eyes met hers, dark and certain. They destroyed their own lives through their choices. I just made sure those choices caught up with them. And yes, Gabby, I'm okay with that. Because people like them think service workers are disposable. Think consequences are for poor people. Think money makes them untouchable. He paused. They needed to learn they were wrong. Gabriella absorbed this. The logic was sound, even if the methods made her uncomfortable. Harrison Yates and his friends had been criminals hiding behind wealth and privilege. Juan had just torn away the curtain. But there was something else. Something in Juan's voice that made her realize this wasn't just about her. This isn't only about the milkshake, is it? She asked quietly. Juan's jaw tightened. No. It's about every person they've humiliated, every inspector they've bribed, every worker whose pension they've stolen, every safety violation that could have killed someone. The milkshake was just the moment I happened to see it. The moment you happened to see them hurt your sister. Yes, he admitted. That's what made it personal. But it's not what makes it right. What makes it right is that they're actually guilty. I'm not manufacturing justice, Gaby. I'm just facilitating it. Gabriella wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe there was a meaningful difference between vengeance and accountability. Maybe there was. Maybe Juan had found a way to use his power that their mother wouldn't have completely hated. Or maybe she was just rationalizing because part of her wanted Harrison Yates to suffer. The detective wants me to give a statement, Gabriella said. About the milkshake. About Harrison. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. What would you do? Juan smiled sadly. I'm the wrong person to ask. I'm biased. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. If you want to press charges, I'll make sure you have the best lawyer. If you want to walk away and never think about it again, I'll respect that too. Will the investigation stop if I don't cooperate? No. Those are separate matters based on financial crimes and safety violations. Your statement would just add context, but it's not required for the other cases. Gabriella nodded slowly. The choice was hers, and somehow that made it harder. When she'd been powerless, the path forward had been clear. Swallow the humiliation, move on, survive. But now she had options, and options required choosing, and choosing required deciding what kind of person she wanted to be. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. They sat in silence for a moment, drinking their respective coffees, two siblings trying to find their way back to each other across 5 years of grief and guilt. Finally, Gabriella asked the question that had been haunting her. Do you think Mama would understand? What you've become. Juan's face transformed with pain. No, I think she'd be disappointed, probably heartbroken. But I also think she'd understand why. She always understood that sometimes you have to make hard choices to protect people. She protected us without becoming what you are. I know. She was better than me. Better than I'll ever be. Juan's voice was raw with honesty. But she's gone, and I'm what's left. I'm trying to be someone she wouldn't be completely ashamed of, trying to use what I've built for something besides profit. I don't know if it's enough. Probably isn't. But it's all I have to offer. Gabriella reached across the table and took his hand. The first physical contact they'd had in 5 years besides that night at the lounge. His tattoos felt rough under her fingers, permanent marks of permanent choices. It's a start, she whispered. Maybe it's a start. The story broke wide open on day 7. New York Tribune ran it first. Manhattan's elite face reckoning, multiple investigations, target wealthy businessman and associates. By noon, every major outlet had picked it up. By evening, Harrison Yates's face was plastered across social media, not laughing at a waitress this time, but stone-faced outside his father's offices, surrounded by lawyers and reporters shouting questions he refused to answer. Gabriella watched it unfold from her apartment, her laptop open to a news live stream, her phone buzzing with messages from coworkers who'd seen her name mentioned in some of the articles. Not prominently, just as an unnamed service worker who'd been assaulted by Yates at a Manhattan lounge. But people connected dots quickly, especially people who'd been there that night. The Velvet Lounge had released a statement condemning Harrison's behavior and announcing a thorough review of security protocols. The manager who'd watched Gabriella get humiliated without intervening had been quietly let go. Corporate had offered her a settlement enough money to cover 3 months' rent in exchange for her silence. She'd declined, not because Juan told her to. He hadn't. But because accepting money for her silence felt too much like letting them buy back her dignity. Her phone rang. Rodrigo's name appeared on the screen. Juan had given her his number, just in case. She answered hesitantly. Ms. Guzman, I hope I'm not disturbing you. No, I was just watching the news. Quite the spectacle, isn't it? Rodrigo's voice carried dark amusement. I wanted to give you a heads up. Your brother asked me to make sure you're aware of some developments. Gabriella's stomach tightened. What developments? Harrison Yates tried to leave the country this morning. He was stopped at JFK passport flag due to the ongoing investigation. He's not officially charged with anything yet, but the government doesn't want him disappearing to a country without extradition treaties. He was running. Rats usually do when the ship starts sinking. Rodrigo paused. There's more. Michael Torino, the nightclub owner, had his liquor license permanently revoked this morning. Turns out he's been serving minors for years, falsifying age verification records. The club is finished. Gabriella closed her eyes. More consequences cascading like dominoes. Trevor Walsh, the car dealer, just had all his assets frozen. Rodrigo continued. The FBI found evidence he wasn't just importing stolen cars. He was part of an international theft ring. We're talking dozens of vehicles, millions in value. He's looking at serious federal time. And the lawyer? James Porter? Disbarred as of this morning. The Bar Association moved faster than anyone expected. Apparently, once they started digging, they found a pattern of corruption spanning his entire career. Multiple judges he'd bribed, court clerks on his payroll. He's facing criminal charges in 3 different counties. 4 men. 4 lives collapsing in perfect synchronized destruction. Rodrigo, Gabriella said quietly, this feels like more than just letting consequences happen. This feels orchestrated. Your brother would say he simply provided information to the appropriate authorities. What those authorities chose to do with that information was their decision. A pause. But yes, Miss Guzman. It was orchestrated. Juan doesn't do anything by accident. After they hung up, Gabriella sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, not bothering to turn on lights. The city glowed outside her window, millions of lives intersecting, colliding, destroying and rebuilding each other in endless cycles. She thought about her mother. About Elena's hands, always rough from hospital soap, always gentle despite their roughness. About the way she'd taught Gabriella that power didn't come from money or fear, but from knowing who you were and refusing to compromise that knowledge. Juan had compromised everything, had built power on foundations their mother would have rejected. But he was trying, however imperfectly, to use that power differently now. Was that redemption? Or just guilt wearing a more attractive mask? Her phone buzzed again. Juan this time. Can I come over? I know it's late, but I think we should talk. Gabriella stared at the message. For 5 years, she'd kept him out of her physical space, maintained the last boundary between his world and hers. Letting him in felt dangerous, permanent. But maybe that's what healing required. Danger, permanence, the willingness to let the past exist in the present, instead of pretending they could stay separated forever. 3rd floor, apartment 3C, she typed back. He arrived 20 minutes later. No suit this time, just jeans and a black shirt, tattoos fully visible on his forearms, looking more like the brother she remembered, and less like the legend he'd become. Gabriella let him in without speaking. Her apartment was small, shabby, honest. Everything Juan's penthouse probably wasn't. Secondhand furniture, books stacked on the floor because she didn't have enough shelves. A kitchen with mismatched dishes and a refrigerator covered in takeout menus. Nice place, Juan said, and it didn't sound sarcastic. It's mine. That matters. He nodded, understanding. Can we sit? They sat at her small kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten breakfast alone for 5 years, and Juan finally said what he'd come to say. The news is everywhere now. Harrison's father is throwing money at lawyers, trying to contain it, but you can't contain truth once it's out there. The Department of Labor has charged Yates Capital with fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Harrison specifically is facing 23 counts. 23. Gabriella's voice was hollow. He didn't just steal from one pension fund. He stole from 15. Workers from construction, transportation, utilities, people who can't afford to lose their retirement savings. He stole their futures because he wanted a bigger yacht. And now he's paying for it. Yes, Juan's eyes were steady, certain. But there's something else you need to know. Something that's going to hit the news tomorrow. Gabriella braced herself. People are talking, Juan continued. About you. About what happened at the Velvet Lounge. Someone leaked the video, not the one Harrison posted, a different one from another angle. It shows everything. The milkshake, your face, the laughter, and then me walking in. Gabriella's blood went cold. Juan. It's going viral. People are calling it Karma's brother and Mafia justice. His voice was tight. They're connecting you to me. They're figuring out who I am. What I do. Meaning what? Meaning the city is starting to remember the name Guzman, and they're learning what happens when you hurt a Guzman. Gabriella stood abruptly, pacing her small kitchen. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world swallowing mine. Now everyone will know I'm your sister. They'll treat me differently. Look at me differently. I'll never just be Gabriella again. Juan remained seated, letting her pace, letting her anger fill the space. When she finally stopped, he spoke carefully. You're right. I can't undo that. Can't make people forget. But maybe that's not entirely bad. How is people knowing I'm connected to a mafia boss not bad? Because people also know now that you're protected, that you're not someone they can humiliate without consequences. Is that really worse than being invisible? Gabriella wanted to argue, but the question hit deeper than she expected. For years, she'd cultivated invisibility, believing it kept her safe. But invisibility meant people could pour milkshakes on her head without fear, meant her dignity was negotiable. Maybe visibility, even dangerous visibility, was a different kind of safety. The video shows me walking in, Juan continued. Shows me giving you my jacket. Shows me looking at Harrison like I'm memorizing him. People are calling it the look of death. He smiled grimly. They're not entirely wrong. You promised no violence. And I kept that promise. But I never promised not to let people understand what it means to cross the Guzman family. Gabriella sank back into her chair. So what happens now? Now? The investigations continue. The charges multiply. And the city learns a quiet rule that's been forgotten. Some families remember. Some families protect their own. And some debts always get paid. Even 5 years later. Especially 5 years later. Juan's voice softened. I failed you once, Gabi. Failed to protect you from grief, from loss, from my own choices. I won't fail again. And anyone who hurts you will learn what I've spent 5 years building the power to teach them. It should have terrified her. Maybe it did. A little. But underneath the fear was something else, something that felt dangerously like relief. She wasn't alone anymore. Wasn't invisible. Wasn't powerless. She was a Guzman. And the city was remembering what that meant. Harrison Yates requested the meeting on day 12. His lawyer made the call to a number that shouldn't have existed, to a man who shouldn't have been reachable, asking for 15 minutes of Juan Manuel Guzman's time. The desperation in the request was palpable even through professional language and legal jargon. Juan agreed immediately. He chose the location, a private room in a restaurant he owned in Tribeca. Upscale but not ostentatious. The kind of place where quiet conversations happened and nobody asked questions. Rodrigo wanted to come as security. Juan refused. This isn't a negotiation, he told Rodrigo. It's a reckoning. I don't need backup for that. Gabriella had asked him not to do anything he'd regret. He'd promised he wouldn't. But regret was subjective, and justice had its own requirements. Harrison arrived exactly on time, flanked by his lawyer, an older man with silver hair and expensive cologne, who'd probably defended plenty of monsters. But even he looked uncertain as they were led to the private room where Juan waited. Juan sat at the head of a table set for 3, though no food had been ordered. The room was small, windowless, soundproofed. Whatever was said here would stay here. Harrison looked different than he had at the Velvet Lounge. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving something raw and frightened underneath. His suit was still expensive but wrinkled, like he'd slept in it. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "Mr. Guzman," the lawyer began. "We appreciate you taking this meeting." Juan held up one hand. The lawyer stopped mid-sentence. "You can leave," Juan said to the lawyer. "This conversation is between me and Mr. Yates. I don't care what you think. This is my restaurant, my meeting, my terms." Juan's voice remained quiet, conversational. "You can wait outside or you can leave entirely, but you're not staying in this room." The lawyer looked at Harrison, who nodded weakly. After a moment's hesitation, the lawyer left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Juan and Harrison sat in silence for a long moment. Harrison's hands trembled on the table. He tried to hide it by clasping them together. "I know who you are now," Harrison said finally. "I know what you are. I know that Waitress Gabriella is your sister." "Good. That means we can skip the introductions. I came here to apologize, to beg for you to call off whatever you've done. My father's firm is collapsing. My friends' lives are destroyed. The federal charges alone could put me away for 20 years. Harrison's voice cracked. "Please. I made a mistake. I was drunk. I didn't know who she was." Juan leaned back in his chair, studying Harrison like an entomologist examining an insect. "You think that matters? That you didn't know who she was?" "I just meant, you meant that if you'd known she had protection, you wouldn't have humiliated her. That her dignity only mattered if she was connected to someone powerful." Juan's voice hardened. "That's exactly the problem, Mr. Yates. You think consequences are negotiable based on who people know. That's not what You poured a milkshake on my sister's head. Slowly, deliberately, while your friends filmed it for entertainment. You turned her humiliation into content." Juan leaned forward. "But here's what you still don't understand. Even if she wasn't my sister, even if she had no one, what you did was still wrong. The consequences would still be deserved." "I'm sorry," Harrison whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Are you sorry for what you did? Or sorry that it caught up with you?" Harrison didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because they both knew the truth. Juan continued, his voice measured and precise. 5 years ago, my mother died. She was a nurse, worked double shifts, never hurt anyone in her life. She died because of my world, my choices, my failures. I've spent 5 years trying to figure out how to live with that guilt. I don't understand what that has to. My sister blamed me, rightfully. She walked away from me because loving me meant accepting the violence that my life created. She chose safety over family. She chose to be invisible because visibility in my world gets people killed." Juan's hands were perfectly still on the table, but his eyes burned with something cold and absolute. "Then you came along. You saw a woman you thought was powerless, invisible, someone whose dignity didn't matter, and you destroyed it for fun. Mr. Guzman, please. I buried my mother because of violence I caused. I lost my sister because of the world I built. I've spent 5 years learning that some debts can never be repaid, that some apologies mean nothing, that guilt doesn't grant absolution." Juan's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "You poured a drink on my sister and laughed. You filmed her humiliation and shared it. You treated her like she was nothing. I know. And You don't get forgiveness, Mr. Yates. You don't get to apologize your way out of consequences. You stole from workers' pension funds. You helped your friends hide their crimes. You built your life on the assumption that wealth meant immunity." Juan stood slowly. "The federal charges against you are real. The evidence is real. The consequences are real. I didn't create your crimes. I just made sure they couldn't stay hidden anymore." Harrison was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I don't want anything from you. I wanted you to understand that actions have consequences, that people you consider beneath you are still people, that my sister's dignity mattered whether I walked through that door or not." Juan moved toward the exit, then paused with his hand on the doorknob. "In 3 days, you'll be formally indicted on 23 federal counts. Your lawyer will tell you to take a plea deal. I recommend you listen to him, because if this goes to trial, more evidence will surface. Evidence that makes what you're facing now look merciful." "How do you know that?" Juan smiled the same polite smile he'd given Harrison at the Velvet Lounge, the smile that had become legend in the days since. "Because I always know. Because people who hurt my family don't get to control how their story ends. because the city remembers now. He opened the door. The city remembers the name Guzman, and they remember that we protect our own. Juan left Harrison sitting alone in the soundproofed room, crying into his expensive suit, finally understanding that some consequences couldn't be bought off, negotiated away, or apologized into forgiveness. Outside, Rodrigo waited with the car. "How did it go?" he asked. Juan slid into the back seat, suddenly exhausted. He asked for forgiveness. I told him no. "Good. Is it?" Juan stared out the window at the city rushing past. "I kept my promise to Gabi. No violence, just truth and consequences. But I still feel like I'm becoming exactly what Mama feared I'd become." Rodrigo was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your mother feared you'd become someone who hurt innocent people for power. You just became someone who hurts guilty people for justice. Maybe that's different enough to matter." Juan hoped so. God, he hoped so. But hope and certainty were different things. And certainty was what the Guzman family dealt in now. Gabriela stood outside the police precinct for 15 minutes before finally walking through the doors. Detective Torres had been patient, had told her there was no pressure, had emphasized repeatedly that giving a statement was Gabriela's choice. But the video had gone viral, millions of views, endless commentary, strangers dissecting her humiliation frame by frame, and silence felt less like safety and more like surrender. She'd told Juan she was coming. He'd offered to accompany her. She'd declined. Some things had to be done alone, and reclaiming her voice was one of them. The precinct smelled like coffee and old paperwork. Detective Torres met her in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the posture of someone who'd seen too much but refused to become cynical. "Ms. Guzman, thank you for coming in." They sat in a small interview room. A recorder on the table, a box of tissues within reach. Torres explained the process, how the statement would be used, how it would remain part of the official record, how Gabriela could stop at any time. "I want to be clear," Torres said. "The federal charges against Harrison Yates don't depend on your statement. Those are based on financial crimes. But if you want to file assault charges for what happened at the Velvet Lounge, your testimony would be important." "Would it matter?" Gabriela asked. "Would it actually change anything?" "It would add context. It would show a pattern of behavior. And it would put on record that what happened to you was wrong, regardless of any other charges." Gabriela thought about her mother. About Elena's voice, always steady, always insisting that speaking truth mattered even when truth was uncomfortable. About the way she'd taught Gabriela that silence protected abusers more than victims. "Okay," Gabriela said. "I'll tell you what happened." She spoke for 40 minutes. Described the Velvet Lounge, the men at table 7, Harrison's smile as he tilted the milkshake, the cold liquid hitting her scalp, the laughter, the phones, the feeling of being reduced to entertainment, to a joke, to nothing. Torres listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes reflecting something that looked like anger. When Gabriela finished, Torres stopped the recorder. "That's assault," she said simply. "What he did to you is legally assault. You have every right to press charges. Will he face additional consequences? Hard to say. With the federal charges he's already facing, a misdemeanor assault charge might seem minor, but it would be on his record, and it would be official acknowledgement that what he did was criminal, not just rude." Gabriela considered this. The practical part of her brain said Harrison was already facing 20 years in federal prison. Adding a misdemeanor charge was meaningless. But another part, the part that still felt cream drying in her hair, wanted official recognition that her dignity had mattered. "I want to press charges," she said. Torres nodded, unsurprised. "I'll start the paperwork. You'll need to come back to sign the formal complaint, probably next week." As Gabriela stood to leave, Torres added, "For what it's worth, I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've seen a lot of powerful men get away with a lot of terrible things because their victims were too afraid or too tired to fight back. What you're doing matters, not just for you, for everyone who's ever been treated like they don't matter." Gabriela's throat tightened. "My brother says consequences should be inevitable, not negotiable." "Your brother sounds like he understands justice better than most lawyers I know." Outside the precinct, Gabriela found Juan waiting despite her telling him not to come. He leaned against a car Rodrigo was driving, hands in his pockets, looking almost nervous. "You didn't have to wait," Gabriela said. "I know, but I wanted to be here when you came out. Wanted you to know you weren't alone. I pressed charges. Assault. Detective Torres says it probably won't add much to what Harrison's already facing, but it felt important." Juan smiled genuine warmth, not the dangerous smile he'd worn in the Velvet Lounge. It is important. It's you taking your power back. That matters more than any federal charge. They stood in the afternoon sunlight, the city flowing around them like water around stones. Juan, Gabriela said carefully, when this is all over, when Harrison is sentenced and the investigations close, what happens to us? What do you want to happen? She'd been thinking about this for days. About whether healing meant separation or connection, whether forgiveness required forgetting, whether they could be family again without pretending the past hadn't happened. I want to try, she said finally. Not to go back to how things were, we can't do that, but to figure out what we can be now, if that's possible. Juan's expression transformed with something that looked like hope fighting through grief. I'd like that. I'd like that more than anything. I still don't forgive you for Mama. I don't know if I ever will. I know. But I'm starting to understand that you're trying, that you've been trying, and maybe that's enough to build on. Juan pulled her into a hug, the first real embrace they'd shared in 5 years. Gabriela stiffened initially, then slowly relaxed into it, letting herself remember what it felt like to be protected by someone who loved her. I'll keep trying, Juan whispered into her hair. Every day, I'll keep trying to be someone she wouldn't be completely ashamed of. She'd hate what you've become, Gabriela said honestly, but I think she'd understand why. And maybe that's something. They separated, and Gabriela wiped tears from her eyes. Crying in front of Juan felt dangerous, vulnerable, but also necessary. Healing required breaking open before it could build back stronger. Do you want to get dinner? Juan asked. Just us. Somewhere quiet. We could talk about something other than revenge and consequences and federal charges. Gabriela laughed, the first real laugh she'd managed in days. Like what? The weather? I was thinking more like memories, good ones, before everything got complicated. Everything was always complicated, Juan. We just didn't realize it yet. Fair point. But there were good moments too. Mama making pancakes on Sundays. You teaching me how to braid hair for your dolls. Me teaching you how to throw a punch when that kid in 7th grade wouldn't leave you alone. Gabriela smiled despite herself. You taught me terrible punching technique. I almost broke my thumb. But the kid left you alone. Because you scared him. Not because I could fight. Details. Juan's smile was the one she remembered from childhood. Mischievous, warm, alive with possibilities. Okay, Gabriela said. Dinner. Somewhere quiet. And Juan? Yeah? Thank you. For everything. For protecting me even when I didn't want your protection. For keeping your promise about no violence. For trying to use your power differently than you used to. I did it for you. I know. But maybe you also did it for you. Maybe you needed to prove that you could be someone other than who you've been. Juan considered this. Maybe. Does it matter why? As long as the result is right? I don't know, but we have time to figure it out. Time. They had time now, something that had seemed impossible 2 weeks ago. Time to heal, time to rebuild, time to discover whether two people shattered by grief could find their way back to something resembling family. It wouldn't be easy, probably wouldn't be clean. But standing outside the police precinct with her brother beside her, Gabriela felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope, not certainty, not forgiveness. Just hope that maybe, possibly, they could build something new from the broken pieces of what they'd lost. And maybe that was enough to start with. The sentencing happened on a Thursday morning in federal court. Gabriela sat in the gallery beside Juan, watching as Harrison Yates stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit that stripped away every vestige of the arrogance he'd worn like armor. His father sat 3 rows behind them, older and grayer than he'd looked in business magazines, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight of watching his empire crumble. The judge was a black woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on refusing to let wealth influence justice. She read the charges with clinical precision, 23 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Then she read the sentence, 18 years in federal prison, restitution of $47 million to the defrauded pension funds, permanent ban from working in financial services. Harrison didn't react, just stood there, hollow, already gone. His friends had been sentenced weeks earlier. Michael Torino got 6 years for the nightclub violations turned out serving alcohol to minors while bribing inspectors was taken seriously when federal investigators actually looked. Trevor Walsh was facing 25 years for the car theft ring. James Porter had taken a plea deal 10 years, disbarment, cooperation with ongoing investigations into judicial corruption. 4 men who'd thought consequences were negotiable had learned differently. As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed, Cameras flashed. Questions were shouted about the Guzman family, about Mafia justice, about whether this was revenge or accountability. Juan ignored them all. He simply kept walking, one hand hovering near Gabriela's back, protective but not controlling, present but not possessive. They found refuge in a small park 2 blocks away. Cherry blossoms were blooming early, painting the world in shades of pink that seemed almost offensively beautiful given everything that had happened. "How do you feel?" Juan asked. Gabriela considered the question seriously. Not satisfied, not happy, just settled, like a debt got paid that I didn't know I was carrying. That's all justice ever really is, not satisfaction, just the settling of accounts. They sat on a bench beneath the cherry blossoms, watching the city move around them. Gabriela had given her notice at both jobs, not because she didn't need to work, but because she'd decided to go back to school. Nursing, like her mother. Juan had offered to pay for it. She'd accepted, but only as a loan she intended to repay. Some gifts were too tangled to refuse, but some boundaries still mattered. "The video's still out there," Gabriela said. "Millions of people saw me at my worst moment. That doesn't go away just because Harrison got sentenced. No. But now when people see it, they also see what came after. They see that actions have consequences, that dignity matters, that the Guzman name means protection, not just power." Gabriela looked at her brother, really looked at him. The tattoos, the expensive clothes, the careful control that never quite masked the guilt underneath. He'd built an empire on principles their mother would have rejected. But he was trying, however imperfectly, to use that empire for something beyond profit. Was it enough? She didn't know. Maybe she'd never know. "What happens now?" she asked. "Harrison's in prison. His friends are facing their consequences. The city knows our name again. Where does that leave us?" "Wherever you want it to leave us. I meant what I said. I'm not dragging you into my world unless you choose it. But I'm already in it. Everyone knows I'm your sister now. That changes things." "Does it have to?" Juan's voice was careful. "You can still be Gabriela. Still build your own life. Still make choices that have nothing to do with me. Being protected doesn't mean being controlled." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because if I don't, then everything I've built just becomes another cage. And I've already trapped myself. I won't trap you too." They sat in silence as cherry blossom petals drifted down like snow. Gabriela thought about her mother, about Elena's hands and voice and the way she'd insisted that family meant protection without possession, love without ownership, sacrifice without resentment. Juan had failed at that once, was failing less now. Maybe that was growth. Maybe that was enough. "I'm going to visit Mama's grave tomorrow," Gabriela said. "Want to come?" Juan's breath caught. They hadn't visited together since the funeral hadn't been able to stand in the same space where their grief lived without tearing each other apart. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that a lot. I can't promise I won't be angry when we're there. Can't promise I won't blame you all over again. I know. I deserve that. But maybe we need to stand there together. Maybe we need to tell her what happened, what we've become. See if we can live with her memory looking at us." Juan nodded, unable to speak around the emotion closing his throat. They stood to leave, and as they walked through the park, a man approached. Middle-aged, construction clothes, rough hands. He stopped them hesitantly. "Are you Juan Guzman?" he asked. Juan tensed immediately, but Gabriela saw no threat in the man's posture, just exhaustion and something that looked like gratitude. "I am. My pension fund, I'm one of the guys Yates stole from. Construction Local 447. They told us today we're getting our money back. All of it, plus interest, because the federal government is making restitution a priority." The man's voice shook. "That's my retirement, man. That's my kids' college fund. That's everything. And if someone hadn't exposed what Yates was doing, we'd have lost it all." Juan didn't know what to say. He'd exposed Yates for Gabriela, for revenge disguised as justice. The pension funds had been convenient evidence, not the motivation, but this man didn't need to know that. "I'm glad you're getting your money back," Juan said simply. "People are saying you're the one who brought it all down, that you're the reason Yates is in prison. I just wanted to say thank you. Whatever your reasons, whatever you did, thank you." The man left before Juan could respond. Gabriela watched her brother's face transform with something complicated, shame and pride and confusion all mixed together. "You did that," she said. "However it started, however it was motivated, you saved that man's retirement. You helped all those workers get their money back. I did it for you. I know, but the consequences went further than me. That's what power does, Juan. It ripples. You used yours for something good, even if that wasn't your primary intention. They walked in silence until they reached Rodrigo's car. Before getting in, Juan turned to Gabriela. Do you think Mama would understand? He asked. Not forgive. I know I don't deserve that. But understand why I became this. Why I used the power I built the way I did. Gabriela thought about her mother's face, about Elena's insistence that every choice mattered, that people were defined not by their worst moments but by what they did after them. I think she'd be heartbroken at what you've become, Gabriela said honestly. But I also think she'd see that you're trying, that you used your power to protect me when I needed it, that you kept your promise about no violence, that you're not as lost as you could be. She took his hand, and I think she'd tell you the same thing she always told us. Tomorrow is a chance to be better than today, so be better tomorrow. Juan squeezed her hand, and for the first time in 5 years, Gabriela felt like they might actually become family again. Not the family they'd been that was gone, destroyed the night their mother died, but something new, something built on honest grief and imperfect protection, and the understanding that love didn't erase mistakes but could coexist with them. The city spread before them, 8 million stories intersecting in endless complexity. Somewhere in that vastness, Harrison Yates sat in a cell learning that consequences were real. His friends faced their own reckonings. Workers' pension funds were being restored. A rule was being relearned. You don't humiliate the Guzman family. Not because they're feared, though they are. Not because they're powerful, though they are that too. But because they remember. Because they protect their own. Because some debts always get paid, and some wrongs demand consequences that can't be negotiated away. Juan Manuel Guzman had failed his sister once, had let his world destroy their mother, had spent 5 years building power from guilt and grief. Now he'd used that power for protection instead of profit. It wasn't redemption, wasn't absolution, but it was a start. And sometimes, a start was everything. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.